views expressed on this program are not necessarily those of WTJX, its board, staff, or underwriters.
Good day. You are listening to Ability Radio. I am one of your hosts, Amelia Hedley Lamont of the Disability Rights Center of the Virgin Islands. And today we're going to talk about a very important law in the world of disability advocacy, the Americans with Disabilities Act. Our special guest today is a staunch advocate and a teacher, really, to our organization with regard to Americans with Disabilities Act advocacy, and his name is Jim Harrington. Good day, James Harrington. How are you?
Good morning. I'm doing just fine. How are you all?
Pretty good. Thank you so much for agreeing to talk with us. I am so honored and pleased and excited based upon, this is like a throwback to the Wayback Machine, because you came to our organization back in 1997, and it was as a result of you suggesting that our office and other protection and advocacy organizations throughout the United States consider a campaign to promote your rights under the Americans with Disabilities Act. And so I thought it was a great idea, and our office started an 8-week litigation campaign. Can you tell us a little bit about it and what was the brainchild behind it?
Well, this is one of those things where the brainchild just happens because of what we're doing. But the idea was to go around the country and set up ADA campaigns. And they would be, of a duration of like 8 weeks, like you all did, or maybe longer, maybe shorter. But the idea was to focus on different parts of the community that were inaccessible, and to do it through a press conference and some litigation at the same time, not only to go after and make places accessible that were being sued, but also as a way of community education and as a way of telling others who are not compliant with the ADA that they might be next. So it had that public education component, that carrot and stick approach to it. But it also, I found it really fascinating and really, really a great honor to work with the disability community and watch how people got involved in this, and to have them at the press conference telling their stories,
right,
to the larger community. So, and we did all kinds of, I can't imagine, I think in Texas alone, we did 50 of these in my tenure at the Civil Rights Project.
Mm-hmm.
And we sometimes just focused on certain things, like not having interpreters at medical facilities, for example, or government buildings that were inaccessible, or trial proceedings that were inaccessible, or restaurants, or grocery stores, or
Mm-hmm.
gas pumps. So there would be specific targets.
Right.
And the idea was that the message would get out, but also we looked for the larger targets that we could find, because usually that meant they had more than one facility, and correcting that one also meant that they would correct all the other ones. So it was a really great, I think, method. The idea sort of started with ADAPT of Texas. We held a press conference in the Capitol Rotunda
Mm-hmm.
at the beginning, and then just sort of picked up from there and developed this as we went along, and had a lot of input from the disability community. So I think it worked really well, for sure.
Oh, it was great.
And,
yeah.
It
was great. There were 3 heroes involved, at least in the Virgin Islands, that I would like to, recognize, and that is Sonny Barnes, Carmen Huertas, and Jamil Muhammad. And it was, as you said, Jim, it was a very empowering moment for the disability community to be, to have that partnership. You know what I mean?
Yeah, very much. And that was part of the agenda too. And I saw this happen, manifest itself in El Paso. So we did, the disability community in El Paso was very active. We did campaigns and all kinds of litigation, but it empowered the community. So that when the county was getting around to allocate how much public housing there would be for people with disabilities, the disability community went and said, we want more than the statutory minimum, which I think at that time was 12%.
Mm-hmm.
And they ended up with 20%.
Wow.
Because of that empowering that went on,
right?
And their presence in the community,
right?
And that ultimately, of course, is our goal. Always is to empower the community.
Right. Yeah. Then in the Virgin Islands, we had an 8-week litigation campaign, and we also, in partnership with the media, our local media, and in particular, Alvin G. He would come to each of these press conferences that we called, and Jamil Muhammad would open up the press conference with a poem. And, one of my favorites had to do with the banks. Another one had to do with restaurants. And he had one called during the week 5. We had a restaurant week. He says, the menu is great, a taste but escape, delectable treats, a serious feast, steaks and chops, seafood and pasta, stir-fried veggies and callaloo, pastries and tarts, carrot cake, ice cream, key lime pie on the menu. Fast food, slow food, cruising and more food. Taste buds excited. Want to begin? No parking, no ramps, no curb cuts and steps. How in the world are we to get in? If you're sitting at the table and your plate is empty, can you call yourself a diner? If you're sitting outside the restaurant because you can't get in, what do you call that? The haves, the have-nots, the disabled, the federal government calls it discrimination. And we all know that it is unacceptable behavior. Our reply is a 5-course menu in court. We will survey, we will consolidate, we will implicate, we will litigate, and have the court adjudicate. And for dessert, you can pay the court costs. Bon appetit. I mean, so it had that kind of, edginess, but also it just gave, like you suggested, Jim, it talks about lived experience and what it's like to not have a seat at the table in any context. And
that's a wonderful, wonderful poem.
He had a lot of gems, and we saved them because, it was just a way in which you can describe what it's like, to not have services or, the ability to even be heard. And then that's when we took the opportunity to announce to the press who was being sued for that particular week. So it was that kind of partnership. And this was, the brainchild of Texas Civil Rights Project.
Yeah. Well, you all did a great job with it. It was, I think that technique of doing the poem is really clever.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Because it gets people to listen to where you're going with.
Yes. And so every week, thank you. It was an 8-week campaign, and it started off with, something for each week. So, and it piqued people's curiosity, as you said.
Yeah.
So
we actually would have press call a couple days ahead of time to say, hey,
right.
Who's the target? Where are you going to be next?
Right. You got to keep that close to your chest.
Exactly. Yeah.
So
it was a great adventure, and particularly that empowering the people, I think, was so good.
Right. Now you also have been doing a lot of work with regard to immigration issues and the like. Tell us a little bit about what the Texas Civil Rights Project was also involved in.
Oh man, I got to tell you this story. So we had a VAWA program,
Violence Against Women Act, right?
In our various offices, and VAWA is a very good protective statute for women, but there is a provision that if somebody brings a spouse into the country illegally and then begins to abuse her, that she can actually separate, she and the kids, get a work permit, and eventually work towards citizenship. It was a wonderful program to help get free women from really oppressive physical and psychological abuse. So here's the story. So I'm writing a memoir right now about my work with the Texas Civil Rights Project, and I'm trying to focus on the clients. So I go down to Mexico for a week, get secluded and write. Of course, that's a good excuse to be near the beach. So on the way back, I'm in Houston, getting ready to come to Austin. And this woman walks up to me. She says, I can't remember your first name, but you're Harrington, right?
Wow.
And I thought, oh, man, here we go. I'm going to get trashed out by somebody again, for my work.
Mm-hmm.
And she says, I was a VAWA client in 2009.
Oh, wow.
You all got me free from my husband who was choking me to death when the police came. I am now a school bus driver for the district.
Wow.
My youngest daughter is studying forensics at Texas State University. My oldest daughter is now a doctor in Guatemala.
Wow.
And I am a citizen. I filled out my own papers.
Wow.
And then she showed me her passport. So I just came back from visiting my mother in Guatemala that I had not been able to do for 20 years.
Oh, my goodness.
And, it was just very wonderful, but it was also very typical of the cases that we handled, just awful, gut-wrenching, heartbreaking cases. But it gave these immigrant women who were brought in, and they'd be threatened, if you call the police, we're going to get you deported. I'm going to get you deported. I'm going to keep the kids, all of that kind of stuff.
Right.
That went on. And so I love that program,
Yeah.
And we did other immigration things too. I mean, we had other cases. We didn't handle immigration cases individually, except for the VAWA,
Right.
because they're very complicated and they go on forever. But anytime we could approach a systemic issue, we did that.
Wow.
For example, one of the cases right before I retired from the project, the counties were refusing to register the births of kids of undocumented women in the United States.
Oh, my goodness.
And the Constitution is very clear. All you have to do is be born in the country and you're a citizen.
Correct.
But they were not registering the births, which then put those kids at risk of deportation because they didn't have any way of proving that they were actually born in the U.S. and citizens of the U.S. Now, how cold-hearted can you get?
Right.
But, I think our lawsuits have a way of cracking cold-hearted people. And that's what we did. We had a wonderful alliance with the Mexican Consul. Of course, was totally upset about this whole thing.
Of course.
But that's an example of an immigration systemic change case that we did. And there were a couple others, but
well, I want to make sure we also bring out, Jim, that you also did a lot of work with the United Farm Workers, right? You worked with Cesar Chavez, and tell us a little bit about that. I mean, that's
yeah. So that's a lot of fun. So I actually worked with Cesar for 18 years. So my first stint in Texas was 10 years along the border, working with the United Farm Workers and organizing. And so I got to meet with Cesar a number of times for 18 years. It was really wonderful. But my first meeting with him, this is really great. So he's coming to, we had conventions every year from the different colonias would send delegations, different farm worker. Colonias are residential areas. So they would all elect representatives and we'd have a convention. So he came for the first one. And so I arranged a meeting with him and some volunteer lawyers Saturday morning. And I remember it was a cold day because it was unusual that we had cold days in South Texas. And he starts off the meeting by saying, I really don't like dealing with lawyers. And I thought, well, that's pretty impolitic. But he went on to say, the problem with lawyers is that they're always telling me, the union, why we can't do stuff. Instead of covering us when we do stuff or telling us how we can do stuff. And he said, I want lawyers that the model is the union model, and that's si se puede. Yeah, it can be done. And so that was a very instructive lesson for me.
Yeah.
That this is what I think lawyers ought to be doing, particularly in the movement, is how do we make things happen and how do we bend the law when we need to bend?
Right.
In fact, we took that model, si se puede, for the Texas Civil Rights Project.
Ah, okay.
And one time I was talking to our South Texas director, Karina, I said, Karina, we've got to figure out how to do this. And she said, I know. I'm CC poeting all over the place. So we turned it into a verb, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But that was our commitment. How do we get this done?
For people in the audience who may not be familiar with the work of the United Farm Workers, can you tell us a little bit about their struggle?
Yeah. So, if you want to look at people that work really, really hard and get paid really, really low and have very bad working conditions, it's the farm workers.
Right.
And they are, as the COVID designation went, essential workers. I mean, we depend on them, of course, to put food on our table.
Right.
But historically, they've been totally and immorally oppressed, and you can't and exploited because the people that do the crops have to come in from Mexico and South because the Americans won't do it. It's such hard work, Americans won't do it.
Right.
And the way we have historically treated them is just pathetic and continues to be that way. And so the role of the United Farm Workers was to unionize workers so they could collectively bargain with the growers. And that started off with a international grape boycott, which finally forced the grape growers into negotiations. And the workers began to get better wages and working conditions, and medical coverage and even some retirement, stuff that we all take it for advantage.
Right.
But it still hasn't reached only a very small part of the farm worker population, primarily because federal law does not protect farm workers in most situations. But so it's been quite a struggle. And, just imagine this. Part of the struggle was to get portable toilets out in the fields.
Wow.
I mean,
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
But, that's what we worked on and are still working on.
Right. So when was the Texas Civil Rights Project founded, so to speak? When did that get off the ground?
It was founded 2 months after the ADA became effective, 1990.
Oh, right.
And so we jumped right in.
Mm-hmm.
We jumped right in.
Wow.
And then the P&A offered me a job, part-time, to train their lawyers and the staff, and out of that is where we get these campaigns that we've been discussing.
Oh, all right.
But it was a way to help fund the TCRP in the beginning because we didn't have very much money. So everything is just amazing to me how many fortuitous steps occur along the line that get you to where you are.
That's right. One of the other poems, if I may, is one that Jamil did having to do with hotels. During week 6 of the campaign, he did a poem called No Room at the Inn. And it says, "This is not a new story from days of glory. They say there's no room at the inn. So for tourists and locals, we all must beware of the hazards of just checking in. No disabled parking or ramps near the steps. The counters and phones are too high. The bathroom's too small. No rails in the stalls. ADA, most hotels don't comply. So again to the courts, legal briefings and torts to obtain our own civil rights. You can have the court costs for being the boss, and the hotels can leave on the lights. After 2,000 years, there's still no room at the inn."
Oh, that's awesome.
Isn't it awesome?
That is so awesome. That is so awesome.
So it gave me goosebumps because we didn't know what Jamil Muhammad was going to come up with. Again, that was his way of saying, okay, here is my take on this particular week with this particular group of defendants. And, I am so grateful that, early in my tenure as director to have had this collaborative process. It was very, very empowering for all concerned. The community and for us as practitioners. And Jim, we never had to go to trial for any of it.
Yeah, no, that is absolutely true. That's how we lawyers learn to live into the community.
Right.
Right. And be part of that struggle. I totally agree, that this was a learning experience both ways.
Yep.
It was an empowering experience both ways.
Right.
And together following the lead of the disability community, made a lot of changes. And that community everywhere has come out ahead in terms of its power, I would say, its political power.
Right.
And you see that, I think, in the widespread acceptance of disability law
Mm-hmm.
in the public,
Mm-hmm.
in a way that other civil rights laws are not accepted
Mm.
totally by the public.
Mm-hmm.
And part of the reason, of course, is that disability cuts across everything, economic, race,
Right.
ethnicity, religion. So, and the longer we live, of course, the more likely we are,
Right.
or our parents are,
Right.
to understand that more deeply and more profoundly.
Right. No, absolutely true. As you mentioned, a ramp benefits everyone, it
Well,
just does.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Amelia, I may have told you this, but it won't stop me again. And that is one of the things that I noticed about doing the ramps at the stores
Uh-huh.
was that the people who are bringing in all these heavy duty carts of beer and all that used the ramp.
Yeah.
And before that, you could see it, they had to basically, jack it up onto over that curb
Yeah.
to get it into the store. And think how many back injuries occurred because of that, or
Right.
hernias or whatever,
Right.
right?
Right.
And how this benefits ultimately the whole community,
Right. Good point.
you know,
Good
for,
point.
for the purpose of inclusion.
Right. Right.
We had a case in which my grandson,
Mm-hmm.
at age 6 months, was the plaintiff,
Okay.
and he won his first case. And that involved, this stuff gets really bizarre at times. So the state requires that when you're born, the baby, that you have the blood tests,
Mm-hmm.
and they do the test for, at that time it was 28 diseases or disabilities. Now I think it's up to 42. But what the state of Texas did is it did not destroy the sample after 2 years, which was the protocol. They kept it. They stored all these baby blood samples over at Texas A&M in a Quonset hut. Why? And they didn't tell anybody they were doing this at all. It was only a fluke that we found out.
Huh.
It turned out that what they were doing, and some of this is kind of scary, is that they were sending samples to the military,
What?
and they were selling samples to pharmaceutical companies.
For what?
So,
Well, not that it matters. Why?
well, that's the question, right? And then
Mhm.
why not tell anybody? Hey,
Right.
we're keeping your kid's blood and we're sending it off to the military,
For
or
profit.
or we're going to make some money off of it.
Uh-huh.
So anyway, we sued over that, and of course, that's blatantly unconstitutional.
Right.
And so they had to destroy 51 5.1 million baby blood samples.
Wow.
And then they try to blame us. And it's like, if you had done this right in the first place, you'd get consent from a lot of people.
Right.
In fact, now there is a consent form that the parents have to sign when going for the baby to be born.
Mm-hmm.
And we call it the Joaquin, my grandson's name, the Joaquin form. And you can opt to let the state keep your baby's blood.
Wow.
So with certain conditions, that are set out, like it's not going to be sold and all that. So 80% of the people right now will sign that,
Right.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Because they're okay
Mm-hmm.
with that,
Mm-hmm.
being used for scientific purpose, but they've given consent.
Mm-hmm.
And then you got 20 people that don't want to do it,
Sure. Yeah.
who don't trust the state. I'm not sure I would sign it either,
Right. Right.
But this was going on secretly for 5 years.
Amazing.
Yeah. So it was interesting. So we did that. That was, I think, the big case. But here's another one that I think is really, really big.
Mm-hmm.
I put it in one of my top 3 cases.
Uh-huh.
So we filed a lawsuit to require lawyers to do pro bono work for the poor community.
I love it.
Yeah. I got more hate mail over this piece of litigation than anything else I did in my life
Amazing.
from lawyers.
Mm-hmm.
And after I saw, and some of them were handwritten, some of them were just awful.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was thinking, there are some lawyers that I probably don't want to inflict pro bono work on clients.
Okay.
But anyway, here's the story. This is really an amazing story. So the trial court throws us out, says it doesn't have jurisdiction. Only the Supreme Court has jurisdiction over the bar,
Mm-hmm.
the lawyers. It goes up on appeal. We win on appeal, gets reversed. Then it goes to the Supreme Court. They flip it back. They say, we have jurisdiction. And what we're going to do, we will do something. And we're going to put it on our administrative docket. And we'll get back in touch with you. And in the meantime, if anybody wants to file any briefing with the Supreme Court, do it. This was in December. Every December thereafter, I wrote a letter and said, hey, what's going on with the administrative docket? Year 6, the clerk says, what administrative docket?
Oh, wow.
And so a week later, I sued the Supreme Court in federal court. And everybody, of course, thinks that was suicidal, but they didn't. I told you I was a badass. So I'm going to put that on my tombstone. I'll come back to tell you a story about suing the Supreme Court of Disability. But anyway, this was so embarrassing to the Supreme Court that it actually decided to have a hearing. And my strategy was, all the legal aid directors will be there, talking. But let's bring in some clients. And we brought in a VAWA client from South Texas.
And this is the violence against women.
Yes, violence against women. And she talked about her case. And you couldn't hear a pin drop.
Okay.
It was so powerful.
Wow. Now, Jim,
and after
we're gonna have to wrap up. I'm sorry to say.
All right, I'm sorry.
No.
Anyway, the net result of that is the Supreme Court actually took action, got funding from the legislature, continues as part of the court budget, and now goes around the country telling other states how to do it.
Excellent.
Absolutely amazing.
Based upon the leadership of our very own. Folks, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. James Harrington, I hope we can do this again.
It's fun. It's fun. Thank you, Amelia. It was a pleasure working with you.
It's been a pleasure and an honor. Folks, thank you so much for listening to Ability Radio. Till the next time, bye-bye.
The views expressed on this program are not necessarily those of WTJX, its board, staff, or underwriters.